My name is Clara Evans. I'm 29, and I never thought a shattered bone would be what finally exposed my fractured family. When the surgeon told me I needed an operation, I called my parents. Their response, "You'll heal, but your sister's future is time-sensitive." They chose my sister Chloe's graduate school orientation over my hospital bed, sending smiling selfies from her new dorm while I stared at sterile, white walls. They had absolutely no idea what their abandonment was about to unleash, or just how methodically I would make them finally understand my worth. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you're from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around for a story about drawing lines that should have been drawn years and years ago. Growing up in a suburb of Philadelphia, our cozy two-story house on Elm Avenue held 4 people, but it always felt like only 3 of them truly mattered. My parents, Helen and David Evans, had built their entire world around their youngest daughter, my sister Chloe. I, on the other hand, was the reliable one, the self-sufficient one, the one who could always handle things on her own. This wasn't a role I auditioned for. It was assigned to me from the moment Chloe was born. My mother was a high school history teacher, and my dad managed a local branch of a large bank. We weren't rich, but we lived a comfortable, middle-class life in a neighborhood with leafy streets and reputable schools. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. 2 loving parents, 2 daughters, and a goofy golden retriever named Buster. But inside those 4 walls, the family dynamic told a completely different story. I learned the lesson early on. Being capable meant being invisible. When I would bring home a report card filled with straight A's, my parents would give a little nod and say, "Of course, Clara, that's what you always do." But when Chloe scraped by with a B-, they'd throw a mini celebration with ice cream and endless praise. The pattern was subtle at first, these little inequities that I tried to convince myself were normal. Maybe all older siblings felt this way. Maybe I was just being overly sensitive. But the evidence just kept piling up year after year. When I was 12, I made it to the state finals for a robotics competition. The event happened to fall on the same weekend as Chloe's ballet recital. "We'll try to make it to your thing after her performance," my mom promised. They never showed up. I accepted my second-place trophy alone, while one of my teachers awkwardly snapped a photo with her phone. When I got home that evening, the refrigerator was already covered with 5 new pictures of Chloe in her tutu. "Your sister needs the encouragement," my dad explained when I finally worked up the courage to ask why they missed my event. "You're already so confident and successful. She struggles more than you do." This became their constant refrain. Chloe needed more attention, more support, more of their presence. My independence wasn't a virtue to be celebrated. It was a convenience to be exploited. It created this perfect, vicious cycle. The more self-reliant I became, the less they felt I needed them, which only pushed me to become even more self-sufficient. My 13th birthday party was called off when Chloe came down with a slight sniffle. My 16th was postponed twice before being forgotten entirely because of Chloe's drama club rehearsals. By my 18th birthday, I had stopped expecting any kind of celebration and just made plans with my friends instead. When my mom acted surprised that I wasn't having a family dinner, I reminded her of the consistent pattern. She dismissed it completely. "Don't be so dramatic, Clara. We've always celebrated your birthdays." The gaslighting stung more than the neglect itself. At least neglect was an acknowledgement of a painful reality. Denial was an attempt to rewrite my entire life experience. The pattern held steady through high school, where I excelled in my classes and was active on the debate team and in the environmental science club. My parents attended exactly 2 of my debates in 4 years, and both times it was only because Chloe happened to have a break between her own activities. They never missed a single one of her performances, even driving 3 hours to see her play a tree with no lines in a regional theater production. I adapted by carving out a life where they weren't the main characters. I built strong friendships, found mentors in my teachers, and spent as much time as I could with my Grandma Margaret, my mother's mother, who saw the dynamic with perfect clarity. "Your parents mean well," Grandma Margaret would tell me during our Sunday teas in her small, cozy apartment across town. "But they've convinced themselves that love means giving the most attention to whoever seems to be struggling the most. It's not fair to you, sweetheart." Grandma Margaret's little living room with its crocheted blankets and the constant scent of lemon bars became my safe harbor. It was the one place I felt truly seen. She came to my debate tournaments, helped me with my college applications, and celebrated my every achievement without any qualifiers. When I left for college at the University of Pennsylvania, it was close enough to visit Grandma Margaret regularly, but far enough to establish a healthy distance from the rest of my family. I fell into a routine that included weekly dinners with my grandmother and maintained a cordial, if distant, relationship with my parents. I'd show up for holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner, listen to the endless stories about Chloe's adventures at her university, and just accept that our family dynamic was probably set in stone. As young adults, Chloe and I developed our own fragile relationship. She wasn't a malicious person, just someone who had grown accustomed to being the sun in our family's solar system. When we spent time together without our parents, I could see glimpses of a genuine connection. She was studying communications and theater, constantly changing her career goals, while our parents happily funded each new passion project. Meanwhile, I was steadily climbing the ladder in my career, managing increasingly complex environmental impact assessments for construction projects across the tri-state area. By 29, I'd been promoted twice, was building a solid retirement fund, and was starting to think about buying my own condo. I did try, on several occasions, to address the imbalance with my parents. Once, after a particularly lopsided Christmas where Chloe received twice as many gifts despite us both being adults with our own jobs, I gently pointed out the disparity. "You're just more practical, honey," Mom said. "Chloe appreciates the little things more. You've always been focused on the bigger picture." The conversation went absolutely nowhere as they twisted my observation into another supposed virtue that somehow justified their neglect. "When you have kids of your own someday," Dad added, "you'll understand that different children just need different things." I stopped trying to make them see. Instead, I focused on building a life rich with people who showed up for me consistently. Friends who remembered my birthday without a reminder, colleagues who valued my contributions, and Grandma Margaret, who loved me unconditionally. What I didn't realize was that the ultimate test of our family's foundation was about to arrive in the form of a shattered tibia and a sister's college orientation. The trail at Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania isn't particularly dangerous by serious hiking standards, but any rocky path can turn treacherous in the wrong conditions. I had organized a weekend trip with 5 colleagues to celebrate the completion of a major environmental impact assessment that had earned our firm significant praise. After months of working 60-hour weeks, we all deserved some fresh air and scenic views. Saturday morning in early September dawned clear and crisp. We got to the trailhead around 9, the parking lot already filling up with fellow hikers eager to enjoy one of the last warm weekends of the season. We chose a trail considered moderately difficult but manageable for our group's mixed experience level. "Race you to the top, Clara," joked Leo, our team's geologist, as we started our ascent. I just laughed. Not a chance. I'm here for the journey, not just the destination. The first hour passed pleasantly as we climbed through a dense forest that gradually gave way to exposed rock face. The conversation flowed easily, a mix of work stories and personal anecdotes. As the tree line receded and the views expanded, we stopped often for photos and water breaks. It happened just past the halfway point. A section of the trail crossed a series of granite ledges that were still slick from an overnight rain. I was leading our group, pointing out a red-tailed hawk circling high above, when my right foot slipped on a patch of wet moss. The world tilted sideways. There was no time to correct my balance. One moment I was standing, the next I was falling backward, sliding down a rock face, and then tumbling down a small ravine alongside the trail. The pain was immediate and breathtaking. I heard someone shouting my name as I came to a rest against a large boulder. My right leg twisted beneath me at an impossible angle. The searing agony told me instantly this wasn't a simple sprain. When I tried to move, a white-hot flash of pain made me vomit. "Don't move, Clara. We're coming down to you." Sophie, our environmental technician and a certified wilderness first responder, was already carefully making her way down the slope. The next 2 hours were a blur. Sophie stabilized my leg using hiking poles and jackets while Leo called for park rangers. The rangers arrived with a rescue team, and the complicated process of getting me out of the ravine began. Every tiny movement, despite their care, sent waves of agony through my body. By the time they loaded me into the ambulance, I was drifting in and out of consciousness from the pain and the morphine they'd given me. In one lucid moment, I asked Sophie to call my parents and Grandma Margaret. At the community hospital's emergency department, X-rays confirmed what I already knew deep down: a complex tibial fracture that would require surgery. The orthopedic surgeon on call, Dr. Patel, explained that I had a comminuted fracture, meaning the bone had broken into several pieces. They would need to be realigned and secured with plates and screws. "We'll need to operate tonight," she explained. "The good news is that with proper surgery and physical therapy, you should regain full functionality. But the recovery will take months, and you'll need significant help during the first few weeks." Sophie sat beside my bed, her normally cheerful face etched with concern. "I called your parents and your grandmother. Your grandma is trying to arrange a ride since she doesn't drive anymore. Your parents said they're on their way." Relief washed over me. Despite our complicated history, I needed my family now. This wasn't a missed birthday party or a school event. This was serious. They would come through for me this time. While I was waiting for surgery prep, I called my parents directly. My mom answered, and I could hear a lot of activity in the background. "Clara, are you okay?" Sophie told us what happened. "I'm going into surgery tonight," I explained, my voice tight with pain despite the medication. "The doctor says recovery will be months. I'm scared, Mom." There was a pause, then some muffled conversation I couldn't make out. My dad came on the line. "Listen, sweetheart, we're in a bit of a situation here. Chloe's orientation at Johns Hopkins starts tomorrow morning, and we're already halfway to Baltimore. You know how important this is for her future." I couldn't process what I was hearing. "Dad, I'm already in a hospital in Pennsylvania. I'm going into surgery. The doctor said I'll need help for weeks afterward." "Clara," my mom's voice cut in, "you've always been so independent and capable. Chloe needs us for this transition. She's nervous about starting her graduate program, and I'm nervous about surgery." My voice broke, and a nurse glanced over with a look of concern. "You'll heal, honey," Dad said in his practical, detached banker voice. "But your sister's future is time-sensitive. This orientation only happens once. We can visit you afterward." The betrayal felt physical, like another bone breaking inside me. So you're choosing her orientation over my surgery? Don't frame it like that, Mom scolded. We're not choosing, we're just prioritizing time-sensitive needs. Your friends are there, and the hospital staff will take excellent care of you. Before I could even respond, I heard Chloe's voice in the background, distant but clear enough. Mom, can we stop for coffee? I need to be alert for the campus tour. We need to go, Clara, Dad said briskly. We'll call to check on you tomorrow, after the welcome ceremony. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. Sophie, who had stepped away to give me privacy, returned to find me sobbing. Clara, what happened? They're not coming, I whispered. Chloe's grad school orientation is more important. Sophie's expression shifted from confusion to pure outrage. Are you serious? You're having emergency surgery. The nurse who had been monitoring me, Jessica according to her name tag, shook her head in disbelief. Honey, is there someone else we can call for you? My grandmother, but she's 82 and doesn't drive. She's trying to find a way to get here. Jessica squeezed my hand. We'll take good care of you, I promise. An hour later, as they were preparing to wheel me to the operating room, my phone pinged with a notification. It was an Instagram post from my mother. A smiling selfie of my parents and Chloe in front of the iconic entrance to Johns Hopkins. The caption read, "So proud of our baby girl starting her master's journey. Proud parents, Johns Hopkins grad new beginnings." They hadn't even mentioned my accident. Not a single word about their other daughter lying in a hospital bed, about to be cut open. I handed my phone to Sophie, who glanced at it and swore under her breath. This is not okay, Clara. This is so far from okay. As they wheeled me towards surgery, something inside me crystallized. The anesthesiologist was explaining the procedure, but my mind was a million miles away, cataloging years of similar moments, all the smaller betrayals that had accumulated like sediment, building the foundation for this ultimate act of abandonment. I had always made excuses for them, always rationalized their behavior, always been the understanding one, the one who prioritized family harmony over my own needs. No more. As the anesthesia began to pull me under, I made a promise to myself through the fog. This would be the last time they hurt me. The last time I would ever accept crumbs of their attention and try to call it love. I didn't know how yet, but I would make sure they finally understood the consequences of treating me like an afterthought. When I woke up hours later in the recovery room, the physical pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the emotional wound that was now fully exposed. My parents had shown me exactly where I stood. Now, it was time for me to show them exactly what that meant for our future. I ended up spending 5 days in the hospital, not the 3 they initially expected. Complications from the surgery, a minor infection, and some concerning drops in my blood pressure extended my stay. During this time, my support system revealed itself with perfect clarity, but it wasn't the one I had been raised to expect. My colleagues from work rotated visits, bringing books, magazines, and updates from the office. Sophie took personal days off to help me coordinate my initial recovery plan. My boss sent a massive fruit basket and assured me my position was secure, telling me to focus only on getting better. Grandma Margaret arrived on the second day, having convinced her neighbor, Mr. Franklin, to drive her the hour and a half to the hospital. At 82, she couldn't help much physically, but her presence was the emotional anchor I desperately needed. "I gave your mother a piece of my mind," she told me, her thin, frail hands clutching mine. "I raised her better than this." My parents, meanwhile, called once a day for brief, distracted conversations. They finally visited on day 4 for exactly 47 minutes, bringing a small, sad-looking plant and an air of nervous energy. Chloe sent a single text with a sad face emoji that said, "Get better soon, sis." While the physical pain was immense, the enforced stillness gave me an unusual amount of time to think. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. The fracture in my leg had exposed the deep fractures in my family relationships, and they could no longer be ignored or minimized. On the morning before I was discharged, I was updating my medical forms when something caught my eye. Despite being 29 years old, with my own established life, my parents were still listed as my primary emergency contact on several hospital forms. The irony was not lost on me. I was their emergency contact, but they couldn't be bothered to be present for my emergency. This small realization triggered a cascade of memories about all the other ways we were still connected. I was still the beneficiary on their life insurance policies and retirement accounts, a fact I knew because I had helped my dad organize his financial documents just last year. I was a co-signer on the family vacation cabin in the Poconos, a small place they'd purchased when I was 22 and had just started my career. Most significantly, I was still managing the investment account that was funding Chloe's tuition for her master's program, a responsibility I had taken on 2 years ago when Dad complained about the complexity of the portfolio. I had remained deeply integrated into my family's practical affairs, even as they kept me emotionally at arm's length. I was good enough to handle their responsibilities, but not important enough to receive their care in a crisis. The imbalance was suddenly glaring and unbearable. "You look like you're plotting something," Grandma Margaret observed as she returned from the cafeteria with a cup of tea. "I'm just realizing some things about boundaries," I replied. She settled into the chair beside my bed. "It's about time. Want to tell me what you're thinking?" Over the next hour, I laid it all out. My observations about the financial and practical entanglements that still bound me to my parents, despite the emotional chasm between us. "I've been functioning as their safety net and their administrator," I concluded, all while being treated like an afterthought. Grandma Margaret nodded slowly. "Your grandfather, God rest his soul, had a saying, 'People treat you how you allow them to treat you.' He wasn't entirely right, but there's some truth in it. You've allowed your parents to take from you without giving back for a very long time." "I thought that's what family did," I said quietly. "Support each other without keeping score." "That only works when everyone is operating in good faith," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "When the giving only goes one way, it's not family support, it's exploitation." During my remaining time in the hospital and the first week at Grandma Margaret's house, where I went for my initial recovery since my third-floor apartment was incompatible with crutches and a wheelchair, I began to document the pattern of imbalance. I created a spreadsheet, listing all the important events in my life my parents had missed versus those they'd attended for Chloe. I noted all the financial responsibilities I'd taken on versus the support I'd received. I reviewed old text messages and emails that demonstrated the pattern of neglect. The evidence was overwhelming, and seeing it all compiled in one place, I felt equal parts vindicated and foolish for having accepted it for so long. My friend Maya, who was a therapist and visited me regularly during my recovery, reviewed my documentation and let out a low whistle. "Clara, this isn't just occasional oversight. This is a consistent, textbook pattern of emotional neglect." "What would you recommend to a client in my situation?" I asked her. She thought for a moment. "I'd recommend they establish clear, non-negotiable boundaries with measurable consequences, not as a punishment, but as an act of self-protection." That conversation with Maya became the blueprint for everything that followed. This wasn't about revenge although I can't deny the thought had crossed my mind in my darker moments. This was about recalibrating a severely unbalanced relationship and protecting myself from any further harm. I consulted with another friend, Ben, who was a financial advisor, about my legal options regarding the various accounts and responsibilities I managed for my family. "You're not legally obligated to continue managing their investments," he confirmed. "As for the vacation property, you could request to be removed as a co-signer, though that might require them to refinance." Armed with all this information, I began drafting a comprehensive plan during my long hours of enforced rest. The strategy wasn't to hurt my parents or deprive Chloe. It was to create a clear and undeniable demonstration of my value by systematically removing the support they had always taken for granted. Throughout this planning period, my parents remained largely absent. They called occasionally, with those same distracted conversations that quickly turned to Chloe's adjustment to graduate school. They visited once more, bringing grocery store flowers and staying just long enough to fulfill what they saw as their obligation before citing a dinner reservation they just couldn't miss. Grandma Margaret watched them leave with a sad shake of her head. "Your mother was raised better than this. I don't know where I went wrong with her." "You didn't," I assured her. "Their choices are their own." One afternoon, about 3 weeks into my recovery, Grandma Margaret shared a piece of family history that illuminated so much about our dynamic. "Your mother was the baby of our family too," she explained. "Her older brother Thomas was brilliant but troubled. He had addiction issues that consumed so much of our attention. Your mother learned that creating small dramas was the only way to pull focus back to her. I see the same pattern with Chloe. And I'm like Uncle Thomas, the one expected to handle everything alone?" I asked. "No, sweetheart. Thomas failed because we overhelped him. You've succeeded despite being underhelped. That's the real tragedy here." This conversation solidified my resolve. The pattern wasn't going to change unless I forced the issue. My parents had shown me exactly where I stood in their list of priorities. Now, it was time they understood exactly what that would mean for our future relationship. With a newfound clarity of purpose and Ben's professional guidance, I finalized my plan. The implementation would begin the moment I returned to my own apartment, where I could access all the necessary documents and accounts. The timeline was set. The boundaries were clear. For the first time in my life, I was going to demand the respect I deserved, not through pleas or explanations that had always failed in the past, but through a clear demonstration of my value, signified by its sudden absence. 6 weeks after the surgery, I was finally cleared to return to my apartment with modified work arrangements. My company allowed me to work remotely 3 days a week while I continued my physical therapy. The metal hardware in my leg was a constant, dull ache, a reminder of both the physical and emotional pain, but it also became a symbol of reconstruction. Both my body and my boundaries were being rebuilt with stronger, more resilient material. My first strategic action was to schedule a meeting with my family's financial advisor, Arthur Finch. I'd known Arthur since I was 24 when I first started helping my dad with family financial matters. He greeted me warmly at his downtown office, his concern evident as he noted my crutches. "Clara, good to see you're recovering. Your father mentioned your accident." "Nasty business. Hiking, was it?" I noted the vague awareness. My father had mentioned my accident, not detailed the severity or expressed any significant concern. "Complex tibial fracture requiring surgical reconstruction," I clarified. "I'll be in physical therapy for months." Arthur winced sympathetically. "Terrible timing, with your sister starting graduate school too. Family resources must be stretched thin, I imagine." That's partly why I'm here, I replied, maintaining a cool, professional tone. I need to recalibrate some financial arrangements. Over the next hour, I methodically untangled myself from my family's financial responsibilities. I transferred the management of Chloe's education fund directly back to my parents, officially removing myself as the account administrator. I set up automated notifications for any financial decisions involving accounts where my name still appeared. I documented everything meticulously, ensuring all the changes were legal and properly recorded. Your parents have relied heavily on your financial acumen, Clara, Arthur noted, looking slightly concerned. Are you sure about these changes? I'm sure they'll manage, I replied. After all, I need to focus on my recovery now. Arthur nodded, though his expression suggested he understood far more than I was explicitly stating. I'll inform them of these changes during our quarterly review next week. Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you mentioned that these adjustments reflect my need to simplify my responsibilities during my recovery. My next step was to address the vacation property in the Poconos. I contacted the bank that held the mortgage and officially requested to be removed as a co-signer. This would force my parents to refinance the loan, but given my father's position at a bank, it wouldn't present a significant hardship, merely an inconvenience, and perhaps a slightly higher interest rate without my excellent credit score attached to the application. With the financial recalibration underway, I turned to establishing physical and emotional distance. I declined the next family Sunday dinner with a simple text, still managing pain and mobility issues, can't make it this week. When my mother pushed back with, we could pick you up, I responded with unwavering clarity. I need quiet recovery time. I'll let you know when I'm up for family gatherings again. I even set up auto responses for their messages. Thanks for your note. I'm focusing on my recovery and limiting communications. I will respond within 48 to 72 hours. This created a crucial buffer that allowed me to engage on my own terms rather than jumping to attention whenever they decided to acknowledge my existence. These small boundaries immediately revealed how accustomed my parents had become to my constant availability. My mother called 3 times in a row after receiving my auto response, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails. My father sent an email asking if I was upset about something. Neither of them directly acknowledged the potential connection to their absence during my medical crisis. Meanwhile, I focused on strengthening the relationships with people who had demonstrated genuine care. My colleagues who had visited the hospital became regular dinner guests as I slowly regained my mobility. Maya, my therapist friend, connected me with a support group for adult children of emotionally neglectful parents. Through this group, I met others with similar experiences, which provided an incredible sense of validation and new strategies. Most significantly, I deepened my relationship with Grandma Margaret, visiting her 3 times a week and helping her arrange some updates to her apartment that would allow her to age in place more safely. The time with her was a healing balm, showing me what family support was supposed to feel like. You seem different, she observed one afternoon as we sorted through old family photographs. More settled in yourself. I'm learning that respect comes from boundaries, not from endless accommodation, I replied. She smiled. It's a lesson I wish I'd learned much earlier in life. Your grandfather and I might have had an easier time of it. 3 weeks into my boundary setting, my parents made an unexpected visit, supposedly to check on my physical therapy progress, but their focus remained entirely on what I could do for them. Actually, Chloe chimed in, having accompanied them, I'm having some issues with my department advisor. Could you help me draft an email that doesn't sound confrontational, but still gets my point across? The familiar dynamic played out right in front of me. their assumption of my availability, their casual requests for my assistance without any reciprocal support, their complete disregard for my current limitations. In the past, I would have accommodated all of their requests while silently suppressing my resentment. Not today. I'm not available for any of those things, I said calmly. I'm still recovering from major surgery, and I'm focusing on my own needs right now. The stunned silence that followed confirmed just how rarely I had ever prioritized myself. My mother recovered first. "Clara, don't be difficult. Family helps family." "Exactly," I replied. "That's what I needed 6 weeks ago when I was in the hospital." "Where were you then?" The direct question hung in the air, creating a visible, palpable discomfort. My father shifted in his seat, while my mother's smile became fixed and rigid. "We've already discussed that," my dad said dismissively. "You know Chloe's orientation was time-sensitive, and apparently my emergency surgery wasn't," I observed coolly. "That's fine. You made your priorities clear. Now I'm making mine clear as well." The tension escalated as they slowly realized I wasn't going to fall back into our established patterns. Their reactions ranged from confusion to indignation to outright anger as they grasped that something fundamental had changed. "We need to have a real conversation about all of this," I concluded. "But not here, not now. I'll set up a time next week when we can discuss the path forward for our family relationships." As they left, their expressions reflected a dawning awareness that the daughter they had always taken for granted was no longer accepting scraps of attention and calling it love. The ground had shifted beneath them, and for once, they were the ones struggling to find stable footing. I chose a private room at a neutral location, a small conference space at the local library, for our family meeting. The setting was intentional, public enough to discourage extreme emotional outbursts, but private enough for an honest conversation. I arrived early to arrange the seating and prepare my materials, which included all the documentation I had compiled. Grandma Margaret insisted on attending, serving as both my support and a witness. "I've enabled this dynamic too, by not speaking up more forcefully over the years," she admitted. "It's time we all faced the truth." My parents arrived precisely on time, their expressions a tense mixture of confusion and defensiveness. Chloe came with them, even though I hadn't specifically invited her. Her presence was actually beneficial. This wasn't just about my relationship with our parents, but about the entire family dynamic. "Thank you for coming," I began formally once everyone was seated. "I've asked for this meeting because we need to address the long-standing patterns in our family that came to a head during my recent medical emergency." My father immediately tried to control the narrative. "Clara, if this is still about the orientation, that was simply the clearest example of a pattern that has existed my entire life," I replied steadily. "Today, I want to share my perspective with evidence and then discuss how we can move forward." I had prepared a simple presentation on my tablet, which I now displayed on the room's small screen. The first slide showed a timeline of significant events in my life, with columns for attended and missed by my parents. I moved through my presentation methodically, showing the clear patterns of emotional support, financial assistance, and practical help, all heavily skewed toward Chloe. I presented text message exchanges, emails, and calendar entries that documented the imbalance. I included financial records showing my contributions to our family's stability, alongside the minimal support I'd received in return. The hospital incident wasn't an anomaly, I concluded. It was the logical extension of a pattern where my needs are consistently deemed less important. Throughout my presentation, my parents' expressions shifted from defensive to uncomfortable, and then to genuinely shocked as the evidence mounted. Chloe stared at the floor, occasionally glancing up at me with a pained expression. "We had no idea you felt this way," my mother finally said, her voice small. "That's not accurate," I countered, gently but firmly. "I have expressed these concerns multiple times over the years. Each time, my feelings were dismissed or explained away. What's different now is that I'm no longer accepting the dismissal. My father, ever the pragmatist, tried to reframe the situation. Every family has different dynamics, Clara. We never meant to make you feel less important." "Impact matters more than intent," I replied, using a phrase I'd learned from Maya. "And the impact has been harmful." I then outlined how my injury and their response had affected me. I described the fear of going into surgery without any family support, the humiliation of having to explain their absence to the concerned medical staff, and the profound loneliness of recovering without their presence. "The nurse who cared for me after surgery," I said, my voice finally betraying a tremor of emotion, "showed more concern in 24 hours than you demonstrated in 6 weeks. She was a complete stranger who understood basic human compassion better than my own parents." My mother began to cry quietly. My father just stared at his clasped hands on the table. Chloe looked absolutely stricken. "I didn't realize," she whispered. "I was just so caught up in my orientation. I should have—" I cut her off gently. "This isn't primarily about you, Chloe. You've been responding to the dynamic our parents created. This is about patterns that were established long before either of us had any control." I then moved to the final part of my presentation, the consequences and conditions. "I've already implemented several changes," I explained, outlining the financial restructuring and boundary setting I had established. "I have removed myself as a co-signer on the lake house, transferred management of Chloe's education fund directly to you, and withdrawn from my advisory role on family investments." My father looked up sharply. "That explains the calls from the mortgage company. Clara, those changes create significant complications for us." "I understand," I acknowledged. "Just as my injury created significant complications for me, complications I had to face largely alone. The parallel hung in the air between us, undeniable. Moving forward," I continued, "I am setting clear conditions for my participation in this family. I'm not cutting contact, but I am fundamentally changing how I engage." I outlined my new boundaries. No more automatic availability, no more unbalanced giving, no more accepting disregard for my needs. I would attend family gatherings only when I was emotionally prepared and would leave if the old patterns emerged. I would no longer manage family logistics, finances, or problem-solving unless and until reciprocal support was demonstrated consistently. "These aren't punishments," I clarified. "They are acts of self-protection and a necessary rebalancing." The silence that followed my presentation was profound. My parents seemed genuinely stunned by the comprehensive evidence and the clear, cold consequences. Their shock revealed just how deeply they had normalized the imbalance, so much so that its clear documentation appeared revelatory rather than confirmatory. "I don't know what to say," my mother finally managed. "We never intended, again, impact over intent," I reminded her. "What matters now is whether you're willing to acknowledge the pattern and commit to changing it." My father, ever the solution-oriented one, asked, "What exactly do you want from us, Clara?" "Equal consideration, reciprocal support, acknowledgement of my value beyond what I can do for the family, and most importantly, accountability when you fall short. Because patterns like this don't change overnight." The discussion that followed was difficult but necessary. My parents alternated between defensiveness and moments of genuine remorse. Chloe mostly listened, occasionally offering insights about how she'd both benefited from and been limited by her role as the family favorite. Grandma Margaret provided crucial historical context, helping my parents connect their behavior to patterns from their own upbringings. "Helen," she said to my mother, "you're repeating what your own father did, focusing on the squeaky wheel while taking the reliable one completely for granted." By the meeting's end, no magical transformation had occurred, but something important had shifted. My parents left with a new awareness they could not unsee and practical consequences they could not ignore. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without softening it to protect their feelings, and for the first time, they had truly heard me. As we gathered our things to leave, Chloe approached me tentatively. "I never saw it before," she admitted, "but looking at your presentation, it's so obvious. I'm so sorry, Clara. It wasn't your responsibility to see it," I told her, "but I appreciate that you do now." The confrontation wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the first step toward either rebuilding our family on healthier terms or accepting its limitations and adjusting my expectations accordingly. Either way, I had finally claimed my worth in a language they couldn't ignore or dismiss. The weeks following our confrontation brought predictable turbulence. My parents cycled through the various stages of response. Initial defensiveness gave way to anger, which then morphed into bargaining, and finally, to the very beginnings of genuine reflection. Their first reaction was to try and recruit allies. My mother called extended family members, presenting a carefully edited version of events that cast me as suddenly unreasonable and cruel. "Clara's accident has really changed her," she told my Aunt Caroline. "She's making all these wild accusations about favoritism and withdrawing from all her family responsibilities." This strategy backfired spectacularly when several relatives, including Aunt Caroline, responded with variations of, "Well, you did miss her surgery for Chloe's orientation." That seems pretty clear-cut. My father took a different tack, attempting to minimize the impact of my financial disentanglement. "These changes are causing us real difficulties, Clara," he complained during a tense phone call. "The Poconos cabin refinancing is going to increase our monthly payment by $200. "I understand that's challenging," I replied calmly, just as recovering from surgery without family support was challenging for me. His silence on the other end of the line acknowledged the parallel I had drawn. Chloe's response surprised me the most. A few days after our family meeting, she asked me to lunch, just the two of us. It was our first one-on-one conversation in months. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, and her usual confident demeanor was replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've been thinking about everything you showed us," she began, fidgeting with her napkin. "At first, I was defensive, like you were attacking me for being the favorite. But then, I started remembering things differently, like when you won that big engineering scholarship, and Mom and Dad barely mentioned it because I was having some drama club issues that week." "That's exactly the pattern," I confirmed. "The thing is," she continued hesitantly, "being the favorite, it isn't actually that great either. I never developed your independence or your confidence. I still call Mom about every little thing because I never had to figure things out for myself. Your presentation made me realize I'm 25 with the coping skills of a teenager. This incredible shift in perspective opened up a new dimension in our relationship. For the first time, we were able to discuss the family dynamic as adults, examining how it had shaped both of us, me into a state of hyper-independence and her into a state of prolonged dependence. That conversation marked the beginning of a more authentic sister relationship, one based on mutual understanding rather than a silent competition for parental attention. Grandma Margaret remained my steadfast supporter throughout this entire period. "Your mother's angry because you've held up a mirror she doesn't want to look into," she observed during one of our regular visits. "But I've noticed she's starting to ask questions about her own childhood. That's progress." Indeed, about a month after our confrontation, my parents began showing small but significant signs of accountability. It started with my father, who had always been the more practically minded of the two. "I've been reviewing our calendars from the past few years," he admitted, during a brief visit to drop off some mail that had been delivered to their house. "The attendance disparity you documented? It's accurate. I just never saw the pattern before." My mother took longer to acknowledge the reality. Her breakthrough came during a challenging family therapy session, one I had agreed to attend after they requested it. "I think," she said slowly, tears streaming down her face, "I've been recreating my own childhood dynamic. My parents always focused on my brother's problems while just expecting me to handle everything on my own. I resented it so much. And yet, I did the exact same thing to you, Clara." This moment of self-awareness didn't instantly repair our relationship, but it opened the door to the possibility of genuine change. The therapy sessions continued, sometimes productive, sometimes frustratingly circular. My parents would make progress, then slip back into old patterns, then recognize their regression and try again. 3 months into this family reconstruction process, a minor health scare with my father created an unexpected opportunity for these new patterns to emerge. He required a routine outpatient procedure, but needed someone to drive him home afterward. In the past, I would have automatically rearranged my entire schedule to help, regardless of the impact on my own work or personal commitments. This time, I assessed the situation honestly. I had an important project deadline that day that absolutely could not be moved. "I can't drive you that day, Dad," I told him directly, "but I can help you arrange another solution if you need it." Instead of the guilt trip I would have received in the past, my father simply said, "I understand. Your work is important. I'll ask your Uncle Robert." This small exchange represented enormous progress. My needs and commitments were being respected rather than dismissed, and my father was finding his own solutions rather than simply expecting me to sacrifice. By the 6-month mark after our confrontation, our family dynamics had shifted noticeably. The changes weren't dramatic or perfect, but they were meaningful. My parents began to check in with me before assuming my availability for family events. They started to show genuine interest in my career and my recovery without immediately pivoting the conversation to Chloe's activities. One day, my mom came over and handed me a small wrapped package. "This is late," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "About 16 years late, actually." Inside was a silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a robot. I looked at her questioningly. "When you won the state robotics competition in 8th grade," she explained. "We missed it for Chloe's ballet recital. I bought this to give you then, but I don't know, time passed and it seemed too late, and eventually I just put it away. I am so sorry, Clara. I really am." The bracelet wasn't valuable in monetary terms, but the acknowledgement it represented was priceless. For the first time, my mother had fully recognized a specific moment of favoritism and had taken concrete action to address it, however belatedly. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. "Thank you for remembering," I said simply. That evening, as we all gathered around Grandma Margaret's dining table, I observed our family with new eyes. We weren't transformed into some perfectly balanced unit. Decades of patterns couldn't dissolve in 6 short months. But we were learning a new way of relating to each other, one that made space for everyone's needs and contributions. My father raised his glass in a toast to Grandma Margaret, to the wisest among us who saw what the rest of us missed for far too long. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, acknowledging the double meaning in his words. The road ahead would still hold challenges and regressions, but for the first time, I felt cautiously optimistic that our family could rebuild on a foundation of mutual respect rather than unbalanced expectations. 1 year after my accident, I stood at the summit of Hawk Mountain, gazing out across the landscape that had changed the course of my life. The physical journey back to this spot had been arduous. Months of physical therapy, gradual strength building, and overcoming the psychological fear of returning to the place where I had been so severely injured. My right leg, now healed but forever marked by surgical scars and internal hardware, ached dully from the climb. The physical reminder of my injury would likely always remain, just as the emotional scars had healed but left their own marks on my psyche. The past year had been transformative in ways I could never have imagined as I lay in that hospital bed, feeling abandoned and hurt. My physical recovery journey had paralleled my emotional one, painful, nonlinear, requiring both professional help and personal determination, and ultimately leading to a greater strength than I had possessed before. Physical therapy had taught me to accept help when I needed it, a profound lesson for someone who had built her entire identity around self-sufficiency. My therapist, Devin, had patiently guided me through exercises while encouraging me to vocalize pain rather than stoically endure it. Asking for help isn't a weakness, he reminded me regularly. It's a human connection. This philosophy extended beyond my physical recovery and into my emotional life. I learned to identify my needs and express them directly, rather than silently meeting everyone else's needs while neglecting my own. I practiced accepting support from worthy sources while maintaining firm boundaries with those who had proven unreliable. My circle of friends deepened and expanded during this period. Colleagues who had shown up for me during the crisis became close friends. My support group for adult children of emotionally neglectful parents provided a community of people who truly understood the unique pain of being overlooked rather than overtly abused. Most significantly, I created personal traditions that centered my own joy rather than revolving around family obligation. I celebrated my achievements with friends who genuinely cheered for my success. I took solo travel adventures to places I had always wanted to explore. I redesigned my apartment to reflect my own preferences rather than accommodating constant family visitors. These changes reflected a fundamental shift in my relationship with myself, from someone who derived her worth primarily from her utility to others, to someone whose intrinsic value existed independently of what she could provide. My family relationships continued their slow evolution toward healthier dynamics. Progress wasn't a straight line. Old patterns occasionally reasserted themselves during holidays or times of stress. The difference now was that I could clearly identify these regressions and hold firm to my boundaries, rather than accommodating for the sake of a false sense of harmony. My parents gradually adapted to our recalibrated relationship. My father, the more pragmatic of the two, adjusted more quickly to the new reality. He began to consult me as an equal about financial matters, rather than assigning me responsibilities without authority. He expressed genuine interest in my career and recovery without immediately pivoting to Chloe's activities. Most importantly, he learned to acknowledge when he slipped into old patterns and made visible efforts to correct his course. "I'm trying to see you clearly," he told me during a conversation about 6 months after our confrontation. "Not just as the capable daughter who handles everything, but as Clara with her own needs and dreams. My mother's journey was more emotionally complex. Her entire identity had been built around her particular style of mothering, and recognizing its harmful aspects threatened her self-perception. Therapy helped her connect her treatment of me to her own childhood experiences of being simultaneously neglected and expected to excel. I think, she admitted during one particularly honest conversation, I resented your independence because I never had the chance to develop my own. I was always taking care of everyone else. This insight didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped to explain the multi-generational pattern at work. And breaking that cycle became important to both of us. Chloe and I developed a real relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. As she worked through her own therapeutic process, she gained insight into how being the favored child had actually limited her growth. I never developed your resilience, she observed during one of our now regular sister lunches. Every obstacle was just removed for me, so I never learned how to overcome anything on my own. We began to support each other's growth in ways our parents had never facilitated. She attended my environmental engineering presentations, and I helped her navigate her graduate school challenges without just solving everything for her. The first Thanksgiving after my accident became a watershed moment in our family's reconstruction. I hosted it at my apartment, setting clear boundaries about timing and expectations. My parents arrived with appropriate contributions rather than last-minute demands. Chloe helped with the preparation instead of expecting to be served. Grandma Elaine watched with quiet satisfaction as we navigated the holiday with a new awareness. You've changed the pattern for generations to come, she told me privately as we washed dishes together. Even if you never have children of your own, you've shown Chloe a different way that she'll carry forward. Professionally, my recovery period ultimately strengthened my career. The necessary accommodations during my healing led to more flexible work arrangements that actually improved my productivity and satisfaction. My company's support during my crisis built a sense of loyalty that translated into greater commitment once I returned fully. Most significantly, the confidence I gained from establishing boundaries in my personal life extended to a professional assertiveness that led to a significant promotion. My boss, Stephanie, noted this change during my performance review. You've always been technically excellent, Clara, but this past year, you've developed a real leadership presence. You advocate for yourself and your team with clarity and conviction. This growth extended into my personal relationships as well. 6 months after my accident, I met Mark, an architectural engineer who specialized in sustainable building design. Our relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully, built on honest communication and mutual respect rather than the caretaking dynamic I had unconsciously sought in previous relationships. What I admire most about you, Mark told me one evening, is how clearly you know your own worth. You don't need me to validate you. You choose to be with me because it adds to an already complete life. As I stood on that mountain summit a year after my fall, I reflected on the wisdom I had gained through this difficult journey. The broken leg had forced me to stop running on autopilot and to examine the patterns I had accepted as unchangeable. The abandonment had clarified which relationships deserved my investment and which required firm boundaries. The recovery had taught me that healing is never just physical but encompasses the mind, heart, and soul. Most profoundly, I had learned that love should never require the sacrifice of one's dignity. Real love makes space for all participants to have needs, to express pain, and to set limits. The family pattern I had accepted for decades wasn't love in its healthiest form. It was a dysfunctional system that diminished all of us in different ways. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was an act of love, for myself primarily, but ultimately for my family too. By refusing to participate in the harmful patterns, I offered them the opportunity to grow beyond their limitations. Some took that opportunity more readily than others, but all of them were changed by the shift in the dynamic. The patterns established over decades couldn't be transformed overnight, but they could evolve with consistent effort and clear consequences. The work wasn't finished. It might never be complete, but the trajectory had fundamentally changed. As I began my descent from the mountain, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but I now possessed the tools and the wisdom to navigate whatever challenges might emerge. I had learned to define my own worth, regardless of the family narrative, to build connections based on reciprocity rather than obligation, and to recognize that sometimes the most loving action you can take is to simply stand firm in your own truth. What was your most profound realization about family dynamics or your own self-worth? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how much you give or how much you sacrifice. It's inherent, it's unchangeable, and it is completely yours. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and growth.